State institutions treat the suppression of truth as a cold business decision. When a country goes to war, the primary goal of the bureaucracy shifts from service to the maintenance of public morale at any cost. This happens because the onset of conflict brings an immediate collision with reality. Grand strategic plans are met with friction, failed supply logistics, broken tactical equipment, and chaotic unintended violence. For a government agency, admitting to these errors is a direct threat to its own survival. A bureaucracy that accounts for its own messiness risks losing the legitimacy it needs to stay in power. This creates a structural problem. The actual truth of the battlefield is simply too heavy and far too nuanced for a panicked population to process efficiently during a crisis. To solve this, institutions manufacture a surrogate reality. They take the scattered, difficult data points of a real conflict and compress them into a single, streamlined narrative that feels emotionally satisfying and easy to believe. By controlling the ground truth during the first critical hours of an event, the state ensures that its version of the world is the only one the public can access. In the digital age, this deception relies on a strategy of saturation. Instead of hiding a single fact, the institution floods the environment with noise. The state pushes out 1,000 conflicting versions of the same event simultaneously. They use synthetic reports, contradictory headlines, and unverified leaks to fill every available information channel. The goal isn't to convince the public that one specific lie is true. It is making the actual truth just one more unverified option among a sea of garbage. As this grid shows, when a single fact is surrounded by hundreds of flashing counterfeits, the mind suffers burnout. Trying to verify the truth becomes so exhausting, the public stops trying. They default to the narrative providing emotional security, looking for the story validating their side. This propaganda is no longer broadcast from a central government podium. It is ambient, living in the background of every social interaction. By utilizing bot networks and social influencers, the state ensures its agenda feels like it's coming from our own peers. This erases the distance between a government's policy and an individual's social identity. Once the boundary is gone, the truth becomes irrelevant. The public adopts the synthetic noise because it is easier to live with than the exhaustion of doubt. Real war is a series of tragic accidents and moral gray areas. But those complexities are structurally incompatible with the motivation required to sustain a long-term conflict. To maintain support, the narrative must be stripped of nuance and rebuilt into a rigid binary structure. This diagram represents how institutions simplify the human experience. The gradient of real motivation is sliced in half, leaving only absolute light and dark. This high-contrast framing triggers the primitive brain. The us versus them circuit activates, critical thinking is bypassed, and the public seeks the comfort of victory. From an institutional perspective, the truth is a liability that requires massive political capital to manage. Propaganda, however, is a high-margin product that is cheap to produce and easy to scale. This allows bureaucracies to operate like shells of their former selves. They maintain the appearance of strength by controlling symbols, which buys them time and access to credit, even as their actual operations fail. Stripping away the complexity of war is an accounting trick. It allows a state to hide its limitations and artificially inflate its perceived power on the world stage. Every time a failure is hidden behind a heroic story, the state institution takes out a high-interest loan. They are borrowing against the future trust of their citizens to pay for today's morale. This creates a compounding debt. The gap between the manufactured story on the news and the lived reality of the people grows wider with every passing week. Eventually, the reality on the ground becomes so undeniable that the institution can no longer afford the interest on its lies. The system defaults. The population realizes that the version of the world they were given was built on a series of deliberate deceptions. When the lie breaks, the sense of security the public felt is replaced by total disillusionment. The institution loses its legitimacy, and the social cohesion it tried so hard to protect simply evaporates. This outcome is a systemic certainty. As long as a bureaucracy prioritizes the security of its narrative over the transparency of its operations, it is moving towards this collapse. If the mechanism of war relies on your mental exhaustion and your need for emotional comfort, then the only way to resist that machinery is through a disciplined habit of skepticism. Survival in this environment requires a protocol for the mind, a commitment to treat every institutional story as a calculated business decision. Until the public demands transparency over comfort, the truth will continue to be the first casualty of every conflict.